Good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here today to talk about a very exciting topic, very important, like innovation in the clinical setting, the strategy that we can implement. So I'm sure you're aware, like if you followed social media and what's happening, like there's really exponential deployment of technology and with potential in the clinical setting, both for healthcare professionals and for patients. So really exciting times. So what we're going to discuss today is like, where are we really now? Is it really a reality? What are the potential benefits of those solutions and the challenges going with them? So to discuss some of those topics, it's my pleasure to welcome a panel of international speakers, experts in their field coming from different countries. So first, we have Dr. Geeta Nair, aka Dr. G. So she's the former Chief Medical Officer of Salesforce. Then we have Dr. Tamara Sunbul, aka Dr. T. She's Medical Director of Clinical Informatics of Johns Hopkins Aramco Healthcare, so coming from Saudi. Then we have Dr. Jonathan Bringas, aka Dr. J. He's the CEO of Lapsi Health and an advisor and educator in digital health. And finally, we have Dr. Austin Chang, aka Dr. A, or Mr. TikTok, Chief Medical Officer, gastrointestinal at Medtronic, and also a gastroenterologist, right?
Thank you.
So welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So as I was mentioning before, we talk a lot about innovation with potential benefits in the clinical setting. So my first question to you is that really a reality, or is it just nice on social media, on paper? Is there really things happening in the clinical setting? Jonathan, let me start with you.
Well, we're definitely seeing a lot of innovation in the clinical settings at the moment, not in the way social media depicts it. We're still a little bit behind that, but definitely innovating. Just the entire evolution of the EHR and the entire evolution of using PACS inside of hospitals for data management, the new omni-channel type of communications that hospitals are taking into consideration for patients are really like starting to be developed probably everywhere in the world. And of course, the part of artificial intelligence, that is a little more tricky. We have seen some developments happening in terms of using, for instance, artificial intelligence for triage or artificial intelligence to actually analyze signals like computer vision in terms of radiology or pathology, or they're using algorithms that are supervised for ECG and those types of data-specific analytics. So yes, I think innovation is happening. Some years from now, it probably will be even bigger and more implemented. We need a lot of validation, but we're seeing it happening.
That's great news. Dr. G, what's your view on that?
Sure. Well, first of all, Aline, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Barcelona Health Hub for such a warm reception. It's truly an honor to be here with my colleagues. Look, without telling you how old I am, or how young I am, rather, I am of the generation of physicians that went from paper to digital in our training. It was extraordinarily fun, I assure you. But we have come a long way. I say that because we have come a long way. If I think about the paper chart that I was first handed as a young physician, that said, we have a long way to go, right? How many of you are happy with your healthcare experience today? How many of you can't wait to go to the doctor or take your loved one to the doctor? Not the case, right? It remains confusing. You're not quite sure of the price point. You don't know the 3 things you need to follow up on. So there are many touch points that are actually simple. I know everyone's very excited about AI. I am as well. But there are some simple, basic concepts that we still have to nail when it comes to the clinical reality of healthcare delivery.
Thank you. So Tamara, you come from a hospital. Can you share your view on that, and also maybe tell us how you can measure the digital maturity of a hospital?
Sure. So, I mean, innovation nowadays is crucial. It's crux to healthcare. And why? I mean, we see increasing costs, right? It's not sustainable. We see the burden of chronic diseases. It's only getting worse and worse. And on top of that, staff shortages. There aren't enough staff to do what's needed to be done. So the promise of innovation comes along and the solutions to all of these, but that's easier said than done. In healthcare, we're always very, we like to think things out. We don't like to try, we won't implement something unless it's tried, tested, FDA regulated, 510K regulated. So we're always wanting to make sure that it's implemented, that it's proved technology. And that makes it a little bit harder for healthcare to adopt things. And then to make it worse, there's all these vendors that are out there, and we talk about interoperability. So how do I integrate these applications with these devices, with my EMR, and how do I get that data flowing is a big, big issue in technology. Now, there are a lot of ways we can measure this because you can improve what you don't measure, and you can't measure what you don't benchmark. So how do we do that? There are a lot of toolkits out there that can help healthcare institutions do that. You have Chime comes out with their Most Wired survey, which tells you how well those digital technologies are implemented. And then HIMSS have a big tool set ranging from EMR adoption to analytics adoption, supply chain, DICOM adoption for imaging, as well as they came out something new, which is called Community of Care, and that is about like population health and improving outcomes. So all these toolkits are out there that you can use to measure, and you don't measure implementation, you actually measure usability of how well these technologies are used and how they are improving outcomes in your institutions.
Fantastic. Austin, so same, if you can share your opinion, but also tell us a bit more about the innovation in the medical device field. What's happening there?
Absolutely. So I see it as two different things. There's one front where we're trying to improve operational efficiency and another front where we're trying to improve clinical outcomes. And as a gastroenterologist, I see, in the US, there are some centers that are implementing digital health solutions to improve efficiency, extending text message reminders to patients to improve the outcomes of that. And then also from the Medtronic front, we're first to market with an artificial intelligence machine learning device to help with polyp detection, to improve colorectal cancer outcomes potentially. And so that's really exciting. So AI is not the future of improving healthcare, it's already here, and we're already seeing that there's significant improvements in adenoma detection rate, which is the primary metric that helps us determine the quality of colonoscopy.
Perfect. So now I think the audience, I'm sure, would be interested in hearing some success stories of implementation in a clinical setting that you've witnessed, that you've been part of, and maybe share what went well, what didn't well so well, the challenges that you encountered. Tamara, maybe do you want to start?
So I see a lot of outcomes. I see AI really bringing a big promise. So we've implemented, at least in our institutions, different cognitive computing models that say risk of readmission, risk of diabetes complication, risk of deterioration, risk of sepsis. So all these are great because they're like pre-alarms that say something is going on, right? So even at the wellness level, when the patient is at home, to we're in the hospital for the different risk of things that they might implement. Now, one of the biggest challenge I see, especially with AI, is the amount and the vastness of data that it requires to work, because you need to feed it a lot to come up with that algorithm to make it really sustainable from one organization to the other. So I think a lot of it is cooperation and different hospitals, different systems, different countries getting together, sharing their data, whether they do it federated or different ways, to be able to come up with these great algorithms that would actually prepare us for the future and get us into that prevention before intervention sort of theme.
Jonathan, so you're involved with many hospitals, especially in LATAM.
Yes, so I think that Tamara said something really important about AI, and AI definitely poses a very interesting opportunity for hospitals, but when we talk about AI, we talk about a very general concept of machine learning, but there are so many different algorithms. You can have Stable Diffusion as an AI algorithm, and that is an algorithm that exists only a couple of months ago. Transformers for generative AI, language models. So there are different types of algorithms. In healthcare, we're seeing the implementation of the oldest ones. Supervised learning is one of those. Computer vision is another one. So computer vision is basically a combination of deep learning and unsupervised learning together with images. So why are they being implemented but not, for instance, the more fuzzy logics or stable diffusion? I'm sorry if I'm talking about very complicated stuff to the audience, but basically there's a reason for that. And if we really understand how do we implement technologies in hospitals, we will realize that physicians want to see evidence. And they want to be able to supervise the information. Even if the AI tells you something, I want to see it just in case it's not right. So when we use, for instance, a stable diffusion, we're just basically using a very deep neural network that doesn't really give you an explanation. It's not explainable AI. So I always divide AI into two groups, explainable AI and unexplainable AI. And for me, explainable AI is what really works in the hospital. So from my experience as implementing artificial intelligence in hospitals, I've done a couple of projects in Oxford, a couple of projects in Erasmus University in Rotterdam, and also in Peru. I'm always looking into the implementation of algorithms that I can explain to doctors. So thinking about ECG Holters and supervised learning algorithms to be able to give a prior diagnostic of a patient. And then if you're a physician and you have questions about that and you don't trust it, you can always go back to the signal and supervise it yourself. Or, for instance, computer vision for pathology or radiology. That's what I've been doing, and I think that works very well. The moment when the doctors will cross that boundary from, first supervising and understanding AI to really trusting, is the moment that we're going to have also a shift in the regulatory side. Because right now, we burden the legal responsibility of the patient's diagnostic and therapeutic. So even if there are companies that would say, I am 98% accurate, there's 2% inaccuracy there, and that 2% is my liability. So that's a little bit how it's going in hospitals, from my experience.
Your liability and the patient's life.
Of course.
Right? I think too often we get very excited when we talk about AI and we forget the problems we're solving. The problem that we're trying to solve is not to replace the physician. I don't think we're there yet, right? But how do you make physicians, nurses, and the care team more efficient to drive operational efficiency, but also clinical outcomes? Because if I'm less burdened, the physician workforce shortage is real, physician burnout is real. If I'm burnt out, you're not going to have a good experience, right? How can I deliver good patient care when I myself am overwhelmed, understaffed, et cetera? So how can AI do clinical decision support, help me action up a care plan quicker? How can AI help me with documentation, prior authorization, and assist diagnostics, but not completely? I always talk about this as an automated, the self-driving cars. How many people are eager to put their children in a self-driving car or to get into a self-driving car? It's just your life, right? Now, if someone was in the driver's seat and it was an AI automated car and a vehicle that perhaps is safer than the human eye, but for the one margin of error, the dog that comes in the middle of the road, I want that steering wheel to still be in the hands of a human. And medicine is very similar. You still want the physician, you still want that human touch. And these are big things we forget, right? The first time diagnosis of cancer, lupus, diabetes, these are not small things. And so I think we have to remember that while technology and digital transformation is excellent and we have more and more work we need to do, the human component cannot be forgotten and instead needs to be integrated in the whole process.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I mean, one of the big limitations, I think, is adoption, as to the point that everybody's saying here. We have a very self-selected group in this room today, which kind of accepts AI very readily. But one of the big challenges that we see with implementing, our AI-driven product is adoption and understanding of AI, and making sure that people understand that human AI kind of, collaboration is there. It's not taking over our jobs. It's kind of supplementing what we're doing. I think the other limitation of AI, or sorry, not limitation of AI, but kind of barrier to these technologies is scaling AI. I think that there's so much that can be done out there, and no one single company can do it all. And so actually with the technology that we have, we understand that polyp detection is just the first step for this. And we actually had an announcement 2 months ago where we collaborated with NVIDIA, kind of the world's big AI tech company. And we announced that we're opening up our device to be a platform, kind of like your iPhone or an app store, so that we can actually host different algorithms on it, because we recognize that we can't develop everything ourselves. We need to collaborate with other companies, other developers, and open it up. And that way, we can accelerate innovation that way.
So I would like to comment about that black box. I think we all touched on it. It's a big challenge for AI. So that black box is two things. It's how interpretable the algorithm is and how explainable. So interpretable, if you say, the backside of having it interpretable is that anybody can copy and paste it, right? So once we know how it works, anybody can copy and paste it, and then you have the issues of malicious attacks. How explainable it is, AI works on deep learning, and that deep learning, those algorithms, the more explainable they are, the less deep learning. So AI has to be really very deep for it to be to work better. So it's like a double-edged sword. So I think this is the issue with vendors coming up and working with the doctors to make it usable and to help them explain how it works.
Exactly. So now I would like to talk about clinical strategy. So how do you design a strategy when you develop a product? When it's your case, Jonathan at LabC or Austin at Medtronic? Jonathan.
Well, for us, when we started to develop products, we came from the physician's perspective. And I think that comes back to the topic of innovation that we just had before. When we think about physicians as limitations of technology, we are completely wrong. And it's easy to justify. I mean, a physician invented the thermometer, a physician invented the stethoscope, a physician invented the sphygmomanometer. Basically, like everything that we are using nowadays to perform medicine was invented by a physician. And there's an era of the biomedical engineers that has started in which they take the role of developers of technology, and then doctors have been relegated to a passenger seat. And that is not ideal, because we know what we need. There's nobody better than us to know what is necessary in the hospital, what is necessary in our day-to-day practice. How do we amplify our work as physicians? So when we created LabC Health, it was because we were a group of physicians that were tired of having to go on the passenger seat. And we decided to take control of that car, of that self-driving car, and make sure that we can actually develop technology that makes sense for us, but also increase clinical outcomes, but also takes care of one part that I think is very important to everyone that has a startup here, which is the user experience. Because we, physicians, have to suffer the burden of not being able to choose which technology we will be using. We can't choose it. A procurement team buys it for us. Except some devices that we have in our practice that are purchased by us, the rest is usually purchased for us by a medical system. So we cannot choose that. But then the user experience is terrible. And you can easily see a very good example with the EHR implementation. Every physician that you see in a hospital will basically be very upset with how monolithic, how inflexible, how as an extra burden using an EHR is. And so for us, when we started to develop technology, we said we have to decrease the administration cost, we have to increase the efficiency of physicians, we have to give them power, and we have to increase the clinical outcomes of patients. And then we created a clinical strategy in which we identify moments of healthcare when the devices can be used. Not only the technology, but also the pathophysiology. So this is the disease, this is the stages of the disease, from the moment of symptoms to diagnostics to therapeutics to monitoring. Where does my technology fit and what for? And then we can deliver that to the markets by justifying the purchase of the product because of user experience and clinical strategy.
Very important, yeah.
I love what you said because, that's my job at Medtronic, is to provide the physician input and be kind of an insider view. I was pretty surprised that I was the first chief medical officer for the GI business at Medtronic, because up until that point, they relied on a lot of external voices, but to have an internal physician voice, to have that user experience and input is, I think, really, really critical. And I would offer not just the physician kind of impact on the physician and the customer, but also on patients, right? And coming from that perspective and understanding, what are the clinical needs out there, that really is what drives our clinical strategy. And for us, we've also adopted this mentality of having artificial intelligence within our mission statement, because that really drives like how we make decisions about what technologies to adopt within our portfolio. I think it's a little bit of a different perspective as kind of a big strategic that Medtronic is versus like a startup company, because we also have to keep in mind what our existing know-how is and how we can like align with what we already are capable of doing to not pivot too far off.
So I have a comment. I agree with both of you. I think it's very important for this audience. I mean, all of you are healthcare leaders here or have a startup. And what you are hearing thematically is so much of digital tech and health tech has been done to physicians and done to nurses, right? We've really thrown this on the workforce, and we've had a lot of downstream effects in terms of burnout, dissatisfaction. I mean, every physician in every doctor's lounge talks about the workaround. Let me tell you how you work around the technology to actually do your work. So I always say this to the product teams, you can't blame the end user. If your product doesn't work, the end user's not going to like it or use it. If it works, you shouldn't have to convince them. Physician or no physician, I feel like physicians have gotten a bad rap in the health tech revolution. So what's really important and what we should have learned by now is we need clinical leaders to come along the way. Whether you're building a product, implementing a product, training a product, you must begin and end with the problem you're solving and recognize that you may have solved one problem and then created 6 new problems. So how are you handling the workflow, and how are you being mindful of how the workflow may have been altered? These are really, really basic and simple methodologies, but they continue to be the path to success. And having clinical leadership, if your product is on the healthcare delivery side, if you are on the healthcare delivery side, everything comes eventually down to patient outcomes. You must have that leadership both in developing the product, training on the product, implementing the product, and on the administrative side, looking at revenues, looking at outcomes. If you do that with discipline, you will be surprised how your end users are on board, because they'll be on board before you even can get the product out, and they'll say, I'm ready for it, I'm hungry for it, I heard this thing is amazing. But that has to be one of the biggest lessons we learn in digital transformation, is the change management piece.
So definitely, I mean, it echoes here. Like, I think the most important message is this co-creation, right? And co-creating, whether you're implementing the service as with your staff or whether you're a vendor who's trying to create something. So co-designing, co-testing, co-developing, all together with the healthcare staff to ensure usability. And among across 3 areas, I think people, processes, technology. With the people, like we said, the use cases, making sure that the requirements are all met with the processes, because a lot of times it's a workflow that needs to be tweaked and fixed. And then when we have those processes, what are our policies and procedures? So we do something, but then our policies and procedures say something else. So having that all aligned. And then I think technology is the easiest piece, because once the people on the processes are easy, the technology is out there. It's just leveraging it. But remember, it's ever evolving. So you have to have it on a horizon scan and know what's new, what's coming out there to know what's the latest in technology.
Well, that's a very important point that you just mentioned. I think we're not saying it enough, especially for the startups out there developing solutions. Like you mentioned, importance of involving the end users early on in the process, being patients or healthcare professionals, etc. And I think another point important is like adoption of those solutions. And I feel part of that goes through education, medical education, being of healthcare professionals or patients. What's your take on that?
Who starts? Me?
You.
I had to ask. So medical education to me is really, in my heart. I have been working with several organizations. I was advising Medscape, not Medtronic, Medscape, on their strategy on digital health medical education. And then I've been working with several universities in LATAM and in Europe, building up the curricula for medical education. We did a digital biomarkers postgraduate education program with Edinburgh, with the University of Edinburgh, which probably you guys remember from Dolly. And what I think is necessary at this point in time is to actually increase the capabilities of the medical curricula. I think that we have been looking at a very exponential growth of technologies in healthcare, from which we're not really, we don't graduate from medical school knowing much about that. And then we don't go through our residency getting much information about that. So I saw some new trends. For instance, the Dutch government just added innovation and digital health as a subject inside of the curricula for residents of clinical specialties, not surgical, don't know why, but clinical, yes, so internal medicine, pediatrics, all those. But then I talked to and you know him, I talked to the Minister of Health of the Netherlands and also the Dean of the Amsterdam UMC, and I was like, so how are you going to implement this? But they have no idea. They're like, well, we're going to think about it. Okay, it's in the curricula, but we don't really know how we're going to teach these people what is the order. How do we organize this? How do we create a real curricula? Which technologies they need to know and which ones they don't. And sometimes people say, but this is unnecessary. However, when you see the actual medical curricula, the ones that we have taken as physicians, we learned what ECG is. We learn how it works in the body, how the signal gets acquired. Where do we put the electrodes and why? We learn about the entire electrical system of the heart and the nodes, and what is the QRS, what is frequency, what is amplitude. We learned all that, and we learned how to see X-rays and CTs and MRIs. We were operators of them. We learned how to use ultrasound and what ultrasound means. Why can't we learn what PPG is? Why can't we learn what portable EEG is? Why can't we learn what artificial intelligence is? So I think there's a discrepancy in the medical education system. They are not really looking at the facts. And it is the responsibility of the ones that started this revolution to bring it into the educational system. I think we're doing an okay job, but we probably should do more.
I totally echo that. John, I don't, for those of you who can't see John that close, he's got like a twinkle in his eye when he speaks about this. Clearly, we have some passionate folks on the panel. So I still see patients at the University of Miami where I practice rheumatology, and I cannot tell you how many times I am humbled by the medical students who say, there's an app for that. Right? Our smartest doctors are the ones in training. And they absolutely not only can embrace this technology, but I think tomorrow, as I look at what you're doing with your company, will be the founders of so many different technologies and just better ways of practicing medicine. It is critical that the healthcare of tomorrow is made and implemented with the physicians of tomorrow. And they are more than ready. They are a generation that has grown up with so much technology that we frankly didn't. So I think there's absolutely more to come. And that generation is more than ready and more than capable of embracing this. So our medical education process has to evolve with this. And you see this, even at University of Miami, there are innovation centers. There's a lot more integration with technology and sort of that leadership, and also an opportunity to work on projects and pilot things. And so for any eager medical student that I work with that is interested in these things, we all the time amplify those types of projects and really integrate it. And I might send a few to you to work with your company, John, because I think they are the brightest minds, and it would be a mistake not to invest in them.
And maybe so, Tamara, when you work at your hospital, or you, Austin, as a gastroenterologist, is there also some technologies implemented for like continuous education, more in terms of tools?
So I think it's also very vital that we don't also stop at medical students and we take it beyond to when the clinicians are there, because technology is evolving, right? So it probably be something different when they're practicing, right? So like for us, for example, we don't give clinicians access to an EMR. We consider it a clinical decision tool. So we don't give them access till they've gotten training. So especially in the AI right now, we're talking about querying those and knowing when to make a decision based on this algorithm and when, how strong is this decision. So all this needs to be taught to our clinicians. So anytime any of these is rolled out, it's rolled out as a program. So what does it mean when this comes as a suggestion to you? When is this real? How strong is the evidence for this? So we roll that out as part of the program. So I think it's we need to integrate that within our even continuous learning within the hospital. And the other area I see that is not that needs to be developed, and I'm glad we have a lot of people from healthcare institutions here, is innovation. Innovation in healthcare, that's not something we talk about a lot. We're always very scared of it, right? So I think a lot of embracing innovation to help us solve our challenges is really, really important. And education about innovation and how to embed, and that safe innovation, how to embed it in hospitals, because you're going to need these hospitals and healthcare institutions in the future, because you're going to need to do clinical trials, and you're going to need to do, you have to put in IRBs, and so you're going to need their partnership. So it needs to be done together. So education about how to pull in, it's okay to have innovation, but how do I make it a safe innovation?
My philosophy is that medical education has to be taken outside of the classroom. And I think where I sit in my role is very unique, because here I have a role in academia, practicing as a gastroenterologist. I'm also in the medical device industry, and I'm also a content creator on social media, on the various different social media platforms: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all of it. And I feel like, it's all about breaking down silos. Now we're more connected than ever, and, patients understand more about, doctors and the healthcare industry. Doctors need to understand more about medical devices and how to innovate. We need to break down all of these silos, and I think social media is a great tool for that. So that's something that I've been taking on myself, and I think that the pandemic actually very, very much catalyzed this whole movement of using social media to impact public health and healthcare. And it's such an important tool because you can do it in a way that's fun and relatable, and not just like, delivering information, but also, making it more approachable. Because I think so many of us as patients, at least for me, before I went to medical school, I found doctors and hospitals to be very intimidating, and we have an opportunity to break down those barriers and make it more relatable, more understandable, and more approachable.
So one thing that I wanted to say is I'm one of the biggest fans of Austin on social media.
There's the twinkle in his eyes.
I follow him everywhere. But, one thing that I wanted to say is I organized a couple of weeks ago a conference in an educational program for the Peruvian College of Physicians with Elsevier on artificial intelligence. And in the last chapter of the course, we had a little conference like this one, or a big conference, because this is a great conference, like this one with AI people for the physicians. And at the end of the course, we're saying goodbye, we're having a little reception, and then a physician comes to me and he's like, so Jonathan, I wanted to ask you something. I had an idea about maybe we can build an AI algorithm that can check our EHR paragraphs, that we can give them like the best possible paragraphs on the chart, and then they can check for us, and we can get like notes. And I'm like, if you give them that knowledge, if you share with your colleagues that knowledge, then they come back with like really innovative ideas. There's a startup that does that, but it's really an innovative idea that otherwise they wouldn't have had, and that's the beginning of adoption, right? Because you already know what we're talking about, you understand the potential, you understand the opportunity, and then the next step is co-creation. And I think it's a great space, education.
It is, yeah. So maybe, Austin, I would like to follow up a bit on what you said, because we are lucky today to have a Medfluencer with us. So Medfluencer is a medical influencer, healthcare professional with lots of followers on social media. So maybe for the audience, can you tell us a bit more like the different platforms where you are present, like what do you use each platform for? I'm sure like Jonathan is very interested because he wants to become a Medfluencer as well, so he will take notes.
I think it's
more for healthcare professional, for patient, like, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that 10 years ago when I started using social media professionally, I started on Twitter. And at the time, within GI, there were probably 5 GIs on Twitter at the time. And so I started building that kind of a professional presence on that platform, and slowly I convinced a lot of my colleagues to get on social media. It wasn't easy. A lot of people, 10 years ago, people weren't as receptive. Now it's almost like a given. Oh, wow. But so Twitter ended up being a big professional community. I think it's a great way to interact with our physician colleagues and other healthcare professionals on there. But when I'm trying to reach different audiences like TikTok, for instance, I can speak to patients and the general public, younger individuals, trainees even. So every platform serves a little bit of a different purpose. The way I communicate on TikTok, as you can imagine, is very different than how I communicate on LinkedIn. I'm not doing dances on LinkedIn. But you know, I think that's sort of the thing is you have to adapt to the culture of each platform and kind of read the room and understand kind of how people communicate, because you have to meet people where they are. You have to meet the audience where they are. And you know, it's not every platform is right for everybody. You know, I think that it took myself a couple of years to get used to being on camera and putting myself on video. But you can play to your own strengths and see which platform is right for you.
Fantastic. Like, how many of you are on TikTok, for instance? Okay.
Okay.
Maybe Instagram or
Instagram?
Instagram,
Yeah.
maybe.
Instagram,
Okay,
everyone.
okay, more.
Okay, a bit more.
LinkedIn, everyone.
LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't be surprised if you come across any of my content on these platforms. I feel like I act very differently. My internet persona is very different.
No, but I really like, you know, I saw this one on Instagram, your picture of the belly, and you can see the different parts, why it hurts, what's behind. I thought that was very, very useful, like great education piece.
And it's fun to make, you know. I wouldn't be
Yeah.
doing it if it wasn't fun. I think that that's the thing is that people need to see that we have fun too. You know, patients, our colleagues, even trainees now. You know, right now, healthcare, we're facing kind of a crisis because it's so difficult to practice medicine. And to convince trainees to want to practice medicine is very difficult. So if we can show that it's still fun and interesting, I think that goes a long way.
And you know, I think that's really important as we look to the future. And sorry, Aline, I think we're taking over the, we're going a little rogue here.
No, that was
But-
my next question. That's perfect.
There you go. As I think about the future, you know, I know nobody wants to talk about COVID anymore, but I think it's very important, especially for all of us who've lived through that pandemic, is to never forget it, because one of the things that struck me the most through the pandemic was this lack of health literacy and this idea that science was taboo or unreachable in some way and so mystical that you had to be an MD or a PhD to understand it. And the idea that politicians could sort of sway the facts was really humbling to me and really inspired me to write a book on misinformation in healthcare and how do we attack that issue. And as I think about all the digital tools, as I think about the mandate of all of you in the audience to fundamentally impact and change healthcare, this misinformation piece is a call to action of our time. Healthcare has to be attainable. It has to be reachable. And so if TikTok is your avenue, if Twitter is your avenue, if there are simple patient journeys that every hospital like Johns Hopkins should have you on as a consumer, I'm all for it. Because we cannot make healthcare so special that the average person cannot understand it, cannot achieve it, and doesn't think it's cool. I think science is super cool, right? I'm like the super nerd. So I want to spread that information, and you cannot talk like Harrison's Principles, you know, a textbook of medicine. You have to speak in plain, simple language that everyone can understand. And then no one can confuse you about the difference between a virus and a bacteria and what you should or shouldn't do about it. So I think if there was ever a call to action for us as we think about the future, the misinformation piece has to be tackled, and digital transformation, that has to be part of your digital transformation strategy.
That's very important. Thank you, Gita. So maybe talking about your future, like a bit of as a wrap-up of that session, we talked about the present, we talked about the opportunities. What does the future looks like for you? For like, if you look like 10 years from now, the healthcare of the future, the hospital of the future, education of the future, what does it look like? Tamara.
So just to follow up on what Gita said, I think we used to say digital front doors, but we know that healthcare doesn't happen in the hospitals anymore or in the clinics, right? Most of healthcare happens at home, or most of health happens at home. So we have to increase awareness and actually patient self being able to know about their condition and self-treat and take care of their own condition, because you can give all the healthcare healthcare that you can, but if the patient is not using it or utilizing it or practicing at home, we've not done anything right from that short episode. So I think that digital front door concept needs to be done. Prevention before intervention needs to be taken as a big, basically, enabler, and education our patients, and that the healthcare doesn't happen to the patient, it happens with the patient, so the patient is a partner in their care. So we need to have these integrated systems that empower patients and educate them. And then coming to the clinician side, especially with physician burnout, decreased staffing, we have to have ways that we can support our clinicians, and that's through AI tools that are coming in. And now the promise of this, something from, like we talked about, cognitive computing models, but then the promise of ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT 4, within like 9 months, it can pass a bar exam at 100%. Like, tell me who can do that as a lawyer, right? And then everything else, it's really progressed. It's almost hitting more than 80% on all standardized tests. So I think we have a lot to see coming from ChatGPT in the future, and AI and cognitive computing models. So a lot to learn. Next thing is happening is digital twins. So the patient, we create a digital twin of that patient, and then we apply algorithms on that digital twin. So we actually test it out on that twin before we test it out on the person. And then moving into precision medicine. And this morning, we're actually talking about CRISPR, gene editing, and the future of medicine is not going to be the same as we see it now. In the future, we probably will be editing genes and actually popping out those abnormal genes and putting in the new ones to treat patients. So we're going to see a whole new platform of health, and we have to all be ready for that. Designing our hospitals, we're not going to see patients, we're not going to see we're going to have ward at home. So a lot of patients will be taken care of at home. So when we design our hospitals, we need to have more intensive areas, less wards, less regular inpatient beds. So I think all of that, we have to think of how we basically plan for the future from now.
Well, what Tamara just said is really, really, really cool, especially the whole part of like hospitals. I was privileged to consult an architectural firm in South America that were trying to redesign the healthcare system of Uruguay. As you guys probably know, I don't know, Uruguay is the only completely interconnected and interoperable country in South America, with 100% usage of EHR and complete FHIR and HL7 interoperability with all their services, which is insane because not even in Europe we have achieved that level of integration. So the next step for them is how do we actually make healthcare accessible? So when I went to this is the best architectural firm of Uruguay, which was commissioned by the government to look into the future and what can we do. We decided to create micro centers for specialties, and this is not done yet, but it's the plans for the future. Create micro centers to spread them around the cities according to the epidemiological components of the population. So if you have an area of the population where it has more diabetes, and in this area of the city there's more obesity because of socioeconomic points that lead to that, then we put an endocrinology microcenter in that area, and we have more patients with cardiac issues, or you have, for instance, an older population in this area because this is an area where people go to retire, then we put a cardiology or a geriatric center in that area. And that really enhances the way access is seen, having a physical and a digital infrastructure so that everyone receives treatments and everyone receives care, but then they can actually access healthcare in a better way. I think that's the future. And of course, what Tamara says about generative AI, it's definitely interesting. But we cannot be misled by generative AI's big fuss. I mean, we probably, all of us have seen this study that was done in California? Doctors versus ChatGPT, empathy and responses. Yeah. But if you go and you really read into this research, it's ridiculous. I mean, they got questions from Reddit, right? That was asked questions by patients on Reddit, and then physicians on Reddit respond these questions, and then they are measuring that against what ChatGPT would tell you. Once we know that ChatGPT will tell you a long answer with a summary. Yeah. You know, we're not robots. We're not going to tell you this is. So in summary, what I just told you is, and I give you a little summary. And also doctors, of course, we have a very high sense of legal responsibility with our patients and ethics. So we're not going to tell them information that could actually damage them. We have to understand the mentality of human beings. If you ask ChatGPT, my head hurts, what could it be? It will even tell you that you might have a brain tumor. Although we as physicians know that most likely you just have a headache. So, of course, there's a lot of things that we can do with generative AI, but there's still a long period of time in which we're going to have to validate and refine the way ChatGPT or any other chatbot or any other language model works towards patients before we can actually test it and make it, give information to patients. We don't want to have another misinformation pandemic like the one that we just had.
Austin?
I think the future to me is about breaking down barriers and working across silos. So it's interesting, I'm seeing a lot of younger physicians, becoming data scientists, getting trained in artificial intelligence and programming and becoming developers themselves. But to me, that's not enough. I feel like I, again, sit in a very unique role where I bridge the gap between the medical device industry and academia, and I've taken it upon myself to try to educate my colleagues on how device innovation works and what that process looks like, what are the regulatory barriers, because without that understanding, you can't really bring your innovation to the masses, to patients. And so I think that's a major barrier that we have to get over. And the other piece of it is the other direction with patients. Again, we're breaking down barriers, breaking down silos. We're going to see more healthcare influencers on social media like myself, more medical professionals being on social media, educating, talking about what they do. I think that at one point was more frowned upon, and we're seeing that it's becoming more widely accepted because of this misinformation pandemic, that we're realizing we need experts out there talking about what they're trained to talk about. So I think that all of you sitting here, are in a great position to be health influencers yourself at a meeting like this. We need more meetings like this to break down those barriers. And so I think the future is going to be up to all of you to create.
I guess no pressure. I've got to bring this home. So first of all, I agree with everything that all of you said. I think for me, one of the call to actions for everyone in this room and everyone in the industry is that healthcare has to be more equal. More equal in access, more equal in relatability, literacy, more equal in leadership. I see a lot more women here than probably 5, 10 years ago. And remembering not just because it's the right thing to do, but again, we just went through COVID-19. Public health is critical across the globe. Doesn't matter where you sit. We are as weak as the weakest among us. And I will say this in my personal journey as a physician and as a woman, every healthcare decision ultimately comes down to a woman. The woman in the home, whoever she is, whatever matriarchal role that is, a mother, a sister, a spouse, that woman is deciding which doctor to hire, which doctor to fire, which medication to take, which medication not to take, which medical device is the right one. So remembering who your constituents are, it's not because it's just the right thing to do, but it's good business. Because you need to speak to that woman if you expect her to come to your hospital or send her child or her elderly family member there. And so whether you are a pharma company, whether you're on the healthcare delivery side, or whether you are an insurance company, ultimately you are talking to someone that looks like me or very close to me. And so remembering that needs to be reflected in your board, in your leadership, and it makes healthcare more equal when you are representing your constituents in everything that you do.
Thank you. I think that was a great way to end up the session. I hope that you're all as inspired as I am about the future, seeing the glass like half full and all the opportunities coming our way. So thank you, everybody, for taking part in that panel. Tamara, Jonathan, Mr. TikTok, Dr. G.
Dr. TikTok.
They will be around so you can go and talk to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.